Deus, o salutaris nostre, Domine ex Deus, Deus, ex Deus, Deus noster, Gabriel ex Esper, Angeli, Arcangeli, Ave Patri, Ladam Deurem, Domino Majestatis,
How's everybody doing? Up and having a fantastic day. It is Thursday, July 3rd. It is the day before the 4th of July, so I will not be here tomorrow. I will not be streaming tomorrow. I will be making UI work tomorrow, editing a very important video because, you know, he's not founding Stock America like I am, so we ought to make all of them work in accordance with the American spirit. But speaking of that video, which will be coming out tomorrow or Saturday, it's a very, very important one, okay? I've been telling you guys about it a little bit this week, trying to get you guys to look forward to it because it is a very important video on justification, the doctrine of justification explained in a way that I think that will be very helpful, in a way in which we can easily draw forward from sacred scripture, the Catholic teaching on justification. I know that's a very big stumbling block for a lot of Protestants. So I did a video on that this week. It will be coming out either tomorrow or Saturday. It's about 15 minutes long. It's not anything super long, but look out for it and be prepared. As soon as it comes out, send it to every single Protestant you know. Send it to your every single contact in your phone. Send it to all of the people that follow you on Twitter. Send it to all your Discord friends. Send it to your entire email list. I don't know, print out. You can't really print out a video. Yeah, I don't know. Download it on an MP, like a flash drive. That's what it's called. Download an MP3 version on a flash drive and give it to your senator and your congressman, okay? Important stuff. So remember, that's coming out tomorrow or the day after. But yeah, that's all that I have. Now we can finally get into the actual show. So this is my fourth, I believe, update about Pope Leo. These build upon one another. So I've done 3 updates from Pope Leo so far, going over all of the documents that he releases, whether it be sermons or speeches or letters or Angelus messages or whatever it may be. I go over absolutely everything. I read absolutely everything twice. And basically what happens is with the older ones, we sort of were building foundations for certain themes. But as is normal when you're somebody who speaks sometimes up to 4 times a day and to very similar audiences, sometimes he repeats himself. So where there's a lot of repetition, I'm not going to be going into it as much detail as I went through it before, explaining his doctrine and such. And then obviously there's certain things where they don't really need an explanation from me, or they're of such a nature where it would be kind of weird if I went and gave an explanation. Like, for example, he gave an entire message on one's vocation to seminarians. And it would be kind of weird for me to cover his teaching on the vocation of the priesthood when that's really not knowledge that is necessarily general. So I will indicate when we get to those messages, hey, if you're interested in, I don't know, Franciscan spirituality, then you should check this out. Or if you're interested in, you have a vocation to the priesthood or are discerning the priesthood, you should check this out. But I'm not going to go over in detail a bunch of stuff that's more or less irrelevant to the general populace. But I will mention everything. So if there's something that catches your attention, it's very easy. If you go back to the first video that I did on this, I give you the instructions. It's very easy to go on the Vatican website, go to the day in which I say it was released, and then just go and read it for yourselves. Or I'll give the title. You can kind of just type it into Google and it'll probably pop up. But yeah, that's kind of the preface right there. So with this week or 2 weeks, I guess, there's a lot that we have to get through. Pope Leo, he says some awesome things. He has actually some pretty fiery statements this time. And there's actually one instance of Pope-splaining that I need to go over, because some people were accusing him of modernism, accusing him of some sort of, error on the Gospels, the reading of the Gospels, the miracles of our Lord, etc. So I will defend Pope Leo's honor on this point. I will defend Pope Leo, not no matter what. Obviously, I think that in certain statements, the Pope can err, but I will defend him as much as I can. Okay, that's at least, well, I'll promise I will defend Pope Leo as much as I can, especially against unjust or not well-founded objections, which this one definitely was one of those. Okay, so we left off actually on June 18th, and June 19th actually didn't have anything, so we're starting on June 20th. And on June 20th, he, because if you remember, one of the main emphases that he gave right from the beginning of his pontificate, that he said was going to be one of the things he was going to cover most, is modern social issues. He said there are certain social issues, especially through the rapid spread of technology, that we really, really need to talk about. We really, really need somebody who is imbibed with the principles of Catholic social teaching, imbibed with the principles of Catholic action, and we need to come up with solutions to these problems. And then we need to actually get people, off their butts and doing things in order to be workers of Catholic action. So you'll notice in my past videos, something that I emphasized over and over and over again is what you see is Pope Leo is giving arguments for Catholic action. He's speaking directly to people like you. He actually at one point specifically talks to young people, and last time he did that as well. But he specifically will address young people, and he'll say, hey, here are the problems with the world. These are the answers that are given by Catholic social teaching. Now get up and fix them. He says, go into politics, or go and join a religious order, or go and, do those many things that you can do in order to fix all of these problems. Everything from problems concerning marriage and the family, to problems concerning the environment, problems concerning the economy, problems concerning corruption. There's a lot of problems that he goes over, and he says, hey, this is the answer that Catholic social teaching has, and these are the solutions that we need to implement. And for one of the biggest ones that he has emphasized, which is very interesting because this seemed to be a little bit more minor in Francis' pontificate, although it did get brought up. There was a famous document from the DDF on this, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. If you want to read that, there was an address of Pope Francis on this topic. I can't really remember much else from that. But Leo, he has mentioned this topic multiple times, and that's the topic of artificial intelligence. So the topic of AI, Pope Leo has seen that this will probably become a massive problem. There is going to be massive societal influences. There's obviously going to be problems when it comes to the increasing use of weapons. So AI is going to be used and weaponized in a certain way to violate the dignity of individuals in war. We've already seen this used in very brutal ways. AI is going to serve problems with the economy because a lot of jobs are going to be able to be automated by AI, which unless you have some sort of social safety net or some sort of way of employing individuals who will now lose their jobs, that could lead to an absolute disaster. It's going to cause problems when it comes to individual intelligence. That's another thing that he emphasizes a lot. And we actually see this. I know a lot of you have probably seen other people, or maybe are an individual who does this. But because of AI and because of the over judgment, the overemphasis, or basically because you regard AI as greater than it actually is. Overestimation, that was the word I was thinking of. So because of the overestimation of the nature of AI, what you have is you have a lot of people who will not learn how to do research. They'll not learn how to think through problems. Rather, what they'll do is they'll do the thing where they do the @Grok, and then it'll give them the answer or something of that nature. Actually, just today, funnily enough, I had a comment from somebody. It was from my stream 2 days ago. Yeah, it was 2 days ago against Redeemed Zoomer and his false statements about the Sacred Heart. And there was somebody who commented below on the video, and they basically said, oh, you're wrong about this detail that I brought forward, which I wasn't wrong about it. They said, you're wrong about this detail. Here's what AI says about it. And then they copy and pasted something from ChatGPT. That is completely ridiculous that you have somebody who, when it comes to matters of religion, which are some of the most important matters that we could be discussing, they put completely their trust in artificial intelligence because they overestimate its competence. So what this does is it completely stifles the ability for a lot of people to think. It completely stunts their intellectual growth. So this is one of the biggest problems and most relevant problems to us, to the internet sphere, which we experience on a day-to-day basis. You see educators all the time bringing this up. And Pope Leo is actually speaking to this difficulty, specifically to the conference on artificial intelligence, talking about actually how it is the role of government. Funnily enough, he brings this up in his Jubilee of Government speech. He says it is the role of government, it is the role of the state to restrict this for the common good. This is basic Catholic social teaching. It's when you have violations of the common good, the liberty of the individual does not beat the common good, okay? Rather, the true liberty of the individual is fulfilled in the common good. But anyway, the liberty of the individual, we're not libertarians. We don't believe that the liberty of the individual, that all of these multinational corporations are able to just do whatever they want to the detriment of the population. So actually what Leo specifically calls on is restrictions to AI in order to stop it from harming the populace, basically. So this is what he says in his message. This is on June 20th. It's the message of the Holy Father to the participants in the second annual conference on artificial intelligence, ethics, and corporate governance. He says, quote, "While undoubtedly an exceptional product of human genius, AI is above else a tool. By definition, tools point to the human intelligence that crafted them and draw much of their ethical force from the intentions of the individuals that wield them. In some cases, AI has been used in positive and indeed noble ways to promote greater equality. But there is likewise the possibility of misuse for selfish gain at the expense of others, or worse, to foment conflict and aggression." And this aspect of fomenting conflict and aggression, using these tools in a false way in order to do this, and in order especially to make money off of this, this is something that he frequently mentions when he's talking especially about war. But he's very much worried that AI is going to fall into people's hands who are going to use them for this. Not like, it's not like they aren't already doing this, but this is the worry that he's bringing forward chiefly, is this needs to be sublimated as a tool, and tools are used for the good of man. AI was made for man, not man for AI, is basically the idea. For its part, the Church wishes to contribute to a serene and informed discussion of these pressing questions by stressing above all the need to weigh the ramifications of AI in light of the integral development of the human person and society. This entails taking into account the well-being of the human person, not only materially, but also intellectually and spiritually. It means safeguarding the inviolable dignity of each human person and respecting the cultural and spiritual riches and diversity of the world's peoples. Ultimately, the benefits or risks of AI must be evaluated precisely according to this superior ethical criterion. So when it comes to this idea of the integral development of the human person, this is something that you'll frequently see in Catholic social teaching. So Catholic social teaching, it doesn't have this idea where we ought to emphasize, to the exclusion of other human goods, one particular human good. So you ought not to emphasize the liberty of man, which is a good. Liberty is a good. Not an absolute good, but it is a good. You ought not to emphasize the liberty of man in opposition to his intellectual well-being. Or you ought not to emphasize his spiritual well-being in opposition to his material well-being. Rather, when we look at the development of the person, it's an integral development. So this is intellectually, spiritually, socially, materially, all of these things coalesce. And there's actually a certain hierarchy and subordination of all of these different goods, depending on the more dignified parts of man, and ultimately sublimated to the chief end of man, which is the beatific vision. So when it comes to AI, we ought not to only consider whether this increases the GDP. We ought not to only consider whether this helps man intellectually. We ought not to only consider whether it helps man socially, or whatever other aspect of man you want to look at AI as helping the good of. Rather, it actually has to help the entire integral good of man, ultimately sublimated to our highest end, which is spiritual. And when it comes to governments, he mentions this again in his speech to the Jubilee of Governments. When it comes to governments, they have the obligation, they have the duty, they have the right to restrict the development of AI in order to encourage and not to contradict the integral good of man. So he goes on, integral AI, especially generative AI, has opened new horizons on many different levels, including enhancing research in healthcare and scientific discovery, but also raises troubling questions on its possible repercussions on humanity's openness to truth and beauty, on our distinctive ability to grasp and process reality. Acknowledging and respecting what is uniquely characteristic of the human person is essential to the discussion of any adequate ethical framework for the governance of AI. Basically the same stuff. All of us, I'm sure, are concerned for children and young people. So this is the point that I wanted to actually highlight, is the concern for the youth, because you guys out there listening, you are the youth, or you are raising the youth. That is you right there. So this is what we need to be concerned when it comes to AI on. So he says, all of us, I'm sure, concerned for children and young people and the possible consequences of the use of AI on their intellectual and neurological development. Our youth must be helped and not hindered in their journey towards maturity and true responsibility. They are our hope for the future and society's well-being upon their being given the ability to develop their God-given gifts and capabilities and to respond to the demands of the times and the needs of others with a free and generous spirit. No generation has ever had such quick access to the amount of information now available through AI. So this is the end of the section that I got. Basically, the idea is that when it comes to young people, when it comes to children, their education is completely different with the advent of AI than any other generation before. And this can be a help. Obviously, this can help with research as a tool. It can help with gathering information. It can help with synthesizing information. It can help with a lot of different things. But when it comes to the way in which education is now wrought in light of AI, a lot of people are not actually able to develop their integral good when they do have AI. It's completely disastrous, actually, for a lot of different people. Okay, then on the 20th, he also had audience with participants in the general chapters of the Friar Minors Conventional, etc. He talks about the Franciscan charism in there. If you're particularly interested in it, you can read about that. And he also had an audience with the priest of the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy. He also basically just talked about the diplomatic service, which we've talked about a million times. So I don't really feel the need to go into this. But the next day, he had actually, because it's the Jubilee of Governments, he had a speech on politics, which is very interesting. It gives us a lot of those principles of Catholic social teaching when it comes to the political realm. I chose bits and pieces of this, so this is not the entire speech. If you want to read it, you can just look it up. But on June 21st, he gave a speech on politics. He talked about AI in there and the government's role in restricting AI, which I didn't include because I just talked about that. But this is what he says when it comes to politics. He says, quote, "Politics has rightly been defined as the highest form of charity," quoting Pope Pius XI. "Indeed, if we consider the service that political life renders to society and to the common good, it can truly be seen as an act of Christian love, which is never simply a theory, but always a concrete sign and witness of God's constant concern for the good of our human family. In this regard, I would like to share with you this morning 3 considerations that I deem important in the current cultural context." So on that first point, I've brought this up a lot before, but when it comes to the temporal sphere, which is generally sanctified by the laity, you can read Vatican II's declaration on the lay apostolate if you want to read more about this. But when it comes to the temporal realm, when it comes to politics, when it comes to all of these different issues, they are not completely devoid of spiritual value. It's not Catholic teaching that all of what matters is what you do at the liturgy, what you do at church, what you do while you're, doing all of those different things, the churchy things. It's not Catholic teaching that those are the only things with spiritual significance. Rather, the temporal order, what you do in governance, what you do in business, what you do in family life, all of these have spiritual significance. And all of these things need to be subordinated to a supernatural end. And if done with the principle of charity, all of these things actually can be meritorious for eternal life. So when he brings up politics, he makes sure that he emphasizes this aspect right there, the spiritual significance of the temporal order, which can be done in charity, and can be ordered to our final end, can be merited. Merit can acquire from it, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something extremely important about the lay apostolate that we need to know. And it's not only that these things have spiritual significance, these things are our proper duty. Our proper duty, our proper right is to engage in these different things as Catholics. You actually don't need to, in order to do Catholic action in the temporal sphere, you actually don't need to have permission from the hierarchy. It is something which is given to you in your baptism, that you ought to engage in these different things. And this, I want to emphasize that, and I want to make that extremely clear, because a lot of people misunderstand this. And this is why in parishes, they'll hear about the lay apostolate, they'll hear about the spiritual significance of the laity, they hear about all of these different things. And when you tell people about these things, what do they initially think? Well, what they initially think about is, oh, well, we need to bring in altar girls. Oh, Susan from the parish council Susan needs to join the parish council. She needs to help out at the liturgy. She needs to do all of these different things. But this is really not what Vatican II's teaching on the lay apostolate is about, and teaching on the significance of the laity is about, and teaching on all of these things is about. Rather, what it means is that in our proper order, it doesn't mean clericalizing the laity. It doesn't mean laicizing the clergy. Rather, it means in our proper order, we do things with the goal in mind that we are doing these things for Christ and ordering them in virtue of charity to our final end. That's what the teaching of the lay apostolate means. So really, the woman who wants to carry out the lay apostolate doesn't go and become a lector. Like that. That's not her first thought. That's not her first intuition. Rather, her first and chief duty is to the sanctification of herself. And then second duty is to domestic society. And this goes for married men as well. But especially women, there's a unique role when it comes to the household. And this is completely lost on a lot of people in the way in which they read this, is they just assume that this is somehow about a sort of clericalizing of the laity, rather than just fulfilling our duties in their spiritual significance. So this is what he means by politics as an act of Christian love, politics as an act of charity. Because these things, when done in the spirit of the gospel, are actually fundamentally religious acts. Okay, so he goes on and he says, in this regard, I would like to share with you this morning 3 considerations that I deem important in the current cultural context. The first concerns your responsibility to promote and to protect, independent of any special interest, the good of the community, the common good, particularly by defending the vulnerable and the marginalized. Okay, right here, this is the fundamental bedrock principle of Catholic social teaching right there, is that the end of the politician, the end of the state, is the common good. Okay? It's not the libertarian ideal of the liberty of the individual. It's not the materialist ideal of the increase of the GDP. It's not any of those things, although they might have some remote connection, subordinated to the common good. These things aren't necessarily bad. But it's not any of those things. Rather, it's the common good. And particularly, we have a certain obligation in justice and in charity towards those who are most marginalized, those who are most vulnerable in society. So he continues, this would mean, for example, working to overcome the unacceptable disproportion between the immense wealth concentrated in the hands of a few and the world's poor. And by the way, he quotes Rerum Novarum on this. This has been Catholic social teaching forever. This isn't like a weird hippie, communist, socialist, Democrat, libtard thing. Actually, overcoming disproportionate degrees of wealth is just a historic Catholic teaching. Those who live in extreme conditions cry out to make their voices heard and often find no ears willing to hear their plea. This imbalance generates situations of persistent injustice, which readily leads to violence and sooner or later to the tragedy of war. Sound politics, on the other hand, by promoting the equitable distribution of resources, can offer an effective service to harmony and peace, both domestically and internationally. So then continuing, in order to have a shared point of reference in political activity. So this is actually his third part. His second part was on religious liberty, but his third part is on the natural law. And I wanted to highlight these 2 things. 1, the common good, and then 2, the natural law. It says, in order to have a shared point of reference in political activity, and not to exclude a priori any consideration of the transcendent in decision-making processes, it would be helpful to seek an element that unites everyone. To this end, an essential reference point is the natural law, written not by human hands, but acknowledged as valid in all times and places, and finding its most plausible and convincing argument in nature itself. In the words of Cicero, already an authoritative exponent of this law in antiquity, I quote from his De Republica, quote, "Natural law is right reason, in accordance with nature, universal, constant, and eternal, which with its commands invites us to do what is right, and with its prohibitions deters us from evil. No change may be made to this law, nor may any part of it be removed, nor can it be abolished altogether, neither by the Senate nor by the people can we free ourselves from it, nor is it necessary to seek its commentator or interpreter. And there shall be no law in Rome, none in Athens, none now, none later, but one eternal, unchanging law shall govern all peoples at all times." Natural law, which is universally valid from and above other more debatable beliefs, constitutes the compass by which to take out our bearings in legislating and acting, particularly on the delicate and pressing ethical issues that today, more than in the past, regard personal life and privacy, end quote. And then he goes on to talk about AI, St. Thomas More as a model of politics, etc. But this is very awesome, okay? We have the Pope who is expounding, and this is to legislators, like these are to people in governmental authority. We have the Pope speaking to people in governmental authority, people who are, in the seats of power in Europe. I don't think there were any American politicians who were showing up to this sort of thing, probably mostly Italians. But anyways, I mean, we have this Pope who is speaking to these individuals. He's actually bringing in a very robust understanding of Catholic social teaching and of traditional principles of jurisprudence, right? He's bringing up issues of the common good, which is, that's a little bit more normal. But he's also bringing up issues of the natural law. He doesn't say that we govern for the liberty of the individual based on whatever. He says that actually we govern on the basis of the common good and by the compass of the natural law, which is just, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. I mean, that's just sort of a clear and concise and, unequivocal statement when it comes to the principles of Catholic politics. And it's just great to see something like that. Okay, so those were from June 21st. Now we're on to June 22nd, which was Corpus Christi, I believe. Yeah, it was Corpus Christi. So he gave two messages that day, a sermon and an Angelus message. They're both about their exhortations about the multiplication of the loaves, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So if you want to read stuff on the Eucharist connected to the multiplication of loaves, you can read those from June 22nd. And then nothing on June 23rd. On June 24th, he gave a message to the Order of Malta. It's very much tied in with the nature of the Order of Malta and things like that. He gives out some exhortations and guidance for doing their ministry, typical mission stuff that he normally mentions. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you can read it. He gives a meditation to seminarians. He gives spiritual direction to seminarians about their vocation. He talks about the Sacred Heart. He talks about silence. He talks about the discernment of spirits. It's actually a very good read. It's an awesome read. He talks about a lot of the traditional principles of Catholic spirituality, specifically for those with a vocation, which is why I'm not going to read from it too extensively. But if you're a seminarian or you are somebody with a possible vocation, a priest, somebody like that, I would definitely recommend reading this. It was a very pleasurable read, especially for him bringing up the issues of silence. This is something which famously Cardinal Sarah, former head of the Dicastery for Divine Worship, or was the Congregation for Divine Worship back then. But the issue of silence, as something central in spirituality in the modern world, because of the great degree of noise from our overconnectedness, the internet, things like that. So it was good to read. It was good to hear him talk about this. I mean, it wasn't anything like a super profound treatise on it or anything, but it was great to read him say something about this. So he says, quote, "If you cultivate your heart through daily periods of silence, meditation, and prayer, you will learn the art of discernment. This too is important, learning discernment. When we are young, we overflow with desires, dreams, and ambitions. Our hearts can often be overwhelmed and bewildered. On the other hand, if we follow the example of the Blessed Virgin Mary, we will surely learn to keep all those things in our heart and meditate on them. St. Luke tells us that Mary could hold together all these things in her heart. Avoid superficiality and hold the pieces of your life together through prayer and meditation. Ask yourself, what is my life experience telling me? What does it tell me about the direction my life is taking? Where is the Lord leading me? Etc. End quote. So yeah, that's just awesome to have him emphasize throughout this speech the issue of silence, which I think is something which resonates with a lot of people. So yeah, if you're interested in that sort of thing, that's from June 24th. Okay, June 25th, he did another audience with seminarians. This was just more seminarian advice if you're interested in that sort of thing. And he also went into the role of the bishop in that day. There was a meditation that he gave with bishops on occasion of their Jubilee. He gave a very thorough account of the role of bishops and the virtues of the bishops and what is necessary for bishops. I thought it was very good. But I actually do want to read through some of what he says because I think it's really cool. I know no bishops are watching. no bishops are watching. So I'm not going to say, oh, if you're a bishop, go and read the whole thing. But I found it to be very interesting. I found it to be very helpful. So this is what he says. Quote, "We as bishops are the primary heirs of that prophetic legacy, which we must preserve and transmit to the people of God by our words and the way we live our lives. At times, preaching the message that hope does not disappoint means swimming against the tide, even in certain painful situations that appear to be hopeless. Yet it is precisely at those times when it becomes all more apparent that our faith and our hope does not come from ourselves, but from God." Then he goes on to talk about all of the different aspects and virtues that are necessary for a bishop, which I left out some of them, but this is what he says. First, the bishop is the visible principle of unity in the particular church entrusted to him. It is his duty to build communion among its members with the universal church by fostering the variety of gifts and ministries given for its growth and for the spread of the gospel. In this service, as in his entire mission, the bishop can count on the special divine grace conferred on him at his episcopal ordination. This grace sustains him as a teacher of the faith, a minister of sanctification, and a spiritual leader. It strengthens his commitment to the kingdom of God, to the eternal salvation of souls, and to the transformation of history by the power of the gospel. And then he goes on to talk about how a bishop lives a theological life. Theological meaning a bishop lives a life of somehow being prompted to act and speak by God, by the Holy Spirit, which is chiefly in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But he talks about the three theological virtues, how faith, hope, and love carry out the mission of the bishop in relation to Hebrews 11. Talks about the human virtues that are also present in the episcopate. It's just a very good overview. It's not too relevant to us, except maybe incidentally, but it is a good overview. I just wanted to give you a little piece of that. Okay, so that same day, he also gave one of his Wednesday audiences. So for those who don't know, when it comes to the Wednesday audiences, they're known as general audiences. These are often what are called catechetical audiences. Catechetical audiences, he goes over a cycle of catechesis. So, for example, Pope Francis went over the 10 Commandments. Pope Francis went over the virtues and vices. Pope Francis went over the meaning of growing old, things like that. Theology of the body, famously speaking, was a series of general audiences that lasted for a very long time. So general audiences are often actually one of the ordinary doctrinal instruments that the Pope uses in his popular teaching to the laity. Like a lot of these addresses and sermons and such, they're not really expected to be a something which is universally relevant, which is why about half of them I skip. And I skip because I'm like, okay, if you're interested in the Franciscan charism, if you're a seminarian, like this might be relevant to you. It's still obviously there's a lot of doctrinal pronouncements in these statements by the popes, but they're not really universally relevant. But when it comes to the general audiences, for a lot of times, what the Pope is trying to do is the Pope is trying this sort of continual education that is relevant to all the Christians. Now, there's a bit of a lapse right now where Pope Leo is going through and giving basically like brief sermons and brief meditations on the parables in the Gospels and various different accounts of the Gospels, not just the parables, various different accounts of the Gospels. So this one was on Jairus' daughter and the woman with the issue of blood. So if you want to read that, you want to read these, go ahead. But usually once we get a little bit into the future, what he's going to start to do, he's going to start to have these catechetical audiences that we're really going to need to pay attention to, because these are going to be something that's worth reading like an encyclical line by line by line and actually exegeting and explaining his text, because these are very significant doctrinal explanations that the Pope is trying to give to us. Except on obviously in a much less solemn level than an encyclical, but it is much more frequent. So yes, when it comes to later, what I'll probably do is I might actually do maybe unique videos on the general audiences, or maybe I'll just deal with those in the beginning of the episode or something like that to uniquely divide them off from the rest, because these things do need to be explained line by line, but he just hasn't started doing that yet. So just hold tight. Eventually he will start something that is doctrinal in nature when it comes to, or catechetical in nature rather, when it comes to his general audiences. For now, he's just kind of continuing on a series of meditations that Pope Francis was doing. He gave a short general message on June 26th, the next day, to the Redemptorists bishops. So if you want to read about that, if you're interested in the Redemptorists and whatever, you can read about that. And then the day after, the same day, actually, sorry. He gave an audience with the participants in the plenary assembly of the ROACO, which is the Reunion of Aid Agencies of the Oriental Churches. So this is about the Eastern churches, which he gave like 5 statements in the last, week and a half about the Eastern churches. So I will be skipping a lot of it because he repeats himself a lot. But he gives a very lengthy commentary on the state of the Eastern churches. And he gives some pretty good advice about how we go about going through times of war. Like what Christians who are just seeing on the news all of these awful things happening, in Iran, in Gaza, all these awful things happening. What are we to do as Christians, in response to these tragic acts? So he does a really good job with that. So I will read off some of that, but this is how it goes. So, quote, "The history of the Eastern Catholic churches has often been marked by suffering and violence. Sadly, there have also been instances of oppression and misunderstanding within the Catholic community itself, which at times failed to acknowledge and appreciate the value of traditions other than those of the West. Yet today, violent conflict seems to be raging in the Christian East with a diabolical intensity previously unknown. Your annual meeting has itself been affected by the physical absence of those who were to have come from the Holy Land, but proved unable to make the journey. Our hearts bleed when we think of Ukraine, the tragic and inhumane situation in Gaza and the Middle East, ravaged by the spread of war. All of us, by virtue of your humanity, are called upon to examine the causes of these conflicts, to identify those that are real and attempt to resolve them, but also to reject those that are false, the result of emotional manipulation and rhetoric, and to make every effort to bring them to light." Yes, I mean, for when it comes to American society in particularly real. When it comes to American society in particular, this is very evident when it comes to the conflicts in the Middle East. Which are the causes of these conflicts that are actually real? What's actually important? What are sort of legitimate grievances and so on? And what are actually propaganda? What are false? Because obviously there is a very intense Zionist influence on our media, on our government, etc. So we need to be very vigilant not to fall into the rhetoric, which will lead people into a sort of bloodthirsty attitude when it comes to war. It says, "People must not die because of fake news. It is truly distressing to see the principle of might makes right prevailing in so many situations today, all for the sake of legitimizing the pursuit of self-interest. It is troubling to see that the force of international law and humanitarian law seems no longer to be binding, replaced by the alleged right to coerce others. This is unworthy of our humanity, shameful for all mankind and for the leaders of nations. After centuries of history, how can anyone believe that acts of war bring about peace and not backfire on those who commit them? How can we think that we are laying the foundation of the future apart from cooperation and a global vision inspired by the common good? How can we continue to betray the desire of the world's peoples for peace with propaganda about weapons buildup, as if military supremacy will resolve problems instead of fueling even greater hatred and desire for revenge? People are beginning to realize the amount of money that ends up in the pockets of merchants of death. This is such an awesome line that he gives right here. I want to emphasize this really strongly. Okay, it says people are beginning to realize the amount of money that ends up in the pockets of merchants of death. Money that could be used to build new hospitals and schools is instead being used to destroy those that already exist. What could he possibly be in reference to? What famous conflict do we have where you have the destruction of hospitals and schools that are ravaged by a sort of military buildup, and the merchants of death are getting rich off of doing this? What possible war could he be talking about when he's referring to this common tragedy? He's obviously talking about the war in Gaza. He's obviously talking about the inflictions that have been done by the Zionist entity, especially targeting the destruction of infrastructure and the way in which it goes about its wars against others. Which he mentions actually instances of the starvation of individuals and the restriction of humanitarian aid. He mentions that in very strong terms as well in another place. I don't know if I actually got the quote forward, but he's very heavily implying on a lot of these things, like the fake news, the refusal to follow international law. Like a lot of these things are very clearly directed at Israel. Okay, so he says, I ask myself as a Christian, so this is the part where he says, okay, well, what the heck do we do? We see all of this stuff. What are we to do? He says, I ask myself as a Christian, in addition to feeling outraged, speaking out and rolling up our sleeves as peacemakers and promoters of dialogue, what else can I do? I believe that first and foremost, we really need to pray. It is up to us to make every tragic news story, every news reel that we see, a cry of intercession before God, and then to offer help, just as you do and as many others can do through you. Yet there is more, and I say this thinking in particular of the Christian East. There is witness. It is our call to remain faithful to Jesus, without allowing ourselves to end up in the clutches of power. It is our call to imitate Christ, who conquered evil by the love that he showed on the cross, and to show a way of reigning quite different from that of Herod and Pilate. Herod, for fear of being deposed, murdered children, who even today continue to be torn apart by bombs. This is brutal. Comparing Israel to Herod, that's pretty strong. That's many would call it anti-Semitic, but Pilate washed his hands, as we risk doing every day until we arrive at the point of no return. So he's saying that that a lot of us who are kind of washing our hands of the tragedies that are being inflicted by, not just Israel, obviously, but primarily Israel has been one of the focuses. Russia's also been a focus, but primarily Israel has been a large focus of Leo himself. He mentions Gaza more than anywhere else. And specifically, this is about very clearly implying things about Gaza. But he's comparing those who are tearing the children apart by bombs with Herod. And he's comparing a lot of those in the West who are sitting on the sidelines and who are just ignoring the problem. He's comparing a lot of those people to Pilate. He's saying just as the Romans washed their hands and, inflicted the penalty, the punishment, so also do a lot of the West. They just wash their hands of these problems and refuse to actually stand up and give the Christian witness. He's saying the Christian witness is to not be caught up in power. The Christian witness is actually to stand against this and say, no, this is just not right. This is evil, actually. He says, let us look to Jesus, who calls us to heal the wounds of history solely by the gentle power of his glorious cross, which radiates the strength of forgiveness, the hope of new beginnings, and a resolve to remain honest and transparent in a sea of corruption. Let us follow Christ, who freed hearts from hatred, and show by us our example how to break free from the mindset of division and revenge. I would like to thank and spiritually embrace all those Eastern Christians who respond to evil with good. Thank you, dear brothers and sisters, for the witness you give, especially when you remain in your lands as disciples and witnesses of Christ. And that last part is something that Francis emphasized, but Leo has emphasized it even more strongly, is the goodness of a lot of these oppressed people in remaining in their homelands and offering witness to Christ rather than fleeing their homelands and forming a diaspora in the West, which is actually an encouragement that is very relevant to the work that Hassan and I and others do with TAVNet with Muslim converts. A lot of Muslim converts, their desire is they're converted to Christianity. They want to openly practice their religion, which is obviously a good desire to have. They want to openly practice their religion. They want to go to the West. Like that's a very normal desire for a lot of them to have. But really what Leo is encouraging them is saying, hey, you're needed in your homelands among your own people. This is where you're needed. So it's a good thing for you to remain in your homelands and to continue to offer the witness of Christ in some of the most difficult places. But yeah, that's something very relevant. Actually, it's a very relevant message to a lot of the people who are Christians in these areas in very difficult situations. And then he has another absolutely awesome rant. This is on the same day, which is, I've been yapping so much I forgot the day I'm on, June 26th. His audience with participants in the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking gives his awesome rant. So he says, quote, "Today, brothers and sisters, we are engaged in a battle that cannot be abandoned as long as around us anyone is still imprisoned in the various forms of addiction." So he says, he basically frames this, and it's so awesome. He frames this of, okay, we have addiction. Specifically, this is about drug addiction. He talks about gambling. He talks about alcohol. This would pornography would also be included under this. Basically, the various forms of addiction he brings up. And then he goes and he absolutely goes scorched earth on a lot of the peddlers of these addictions. And he's like, the government's like, stop throwing people in jail for all of the things that they do, influenced by these drugs and such. If you're not willing to actually go to the top and cut the head off the snake, if you're not actually willing to arrest the drug dealers, arrest the pornography people, arrest all these people who are basically systematically providing things which inevitably addict people. He's saying this is not Pope Leo destroying libertarianism as we speak. It's absolutely awesome. He mentions alcohol too, which is funny. Says our fight is against those who make their immense business out of drugs and every other addiction. Think of alcohol and gambling, for example. There are huge concentrations of interest and extensive criminal organizations that states have a duty to dismantle. It is easier to fight against their victims. Too often, in the name of security, war is waged against the poor, filling prisons with those who are merely the final link in a chain of death. Those who hold the chain in their hands instead manage to gain influence and impunity. So true, Pope Leo. The Jubilee indicates the culture of encounter as the way to safety. It asks of us the restitution and redistribution of unjustly accumulated wealth as the way of personal and civil reconciliation. So true. As in heaven, so on earth, the city of God commits us to prophecy in the city of men. And this we know can lead to a martyrdom today. He's like, you got to destroy all of these peddlers of addiction. You got to destroy, these drug corporations. You got to destroy, those who addict people to pornography, alcohol, drugs, gambling. You got to destroy these to the point of martyrdom. And this is the call of the new martyrdom, to destroy all of these businesses which are enslaving the poor and helpless people. This is just so awesome. This is just such an awesome message. This is so much better than like the lame, the gay American ideas of just, we just, it's just, we just gotta, just let people make the choice. Let the people make the choice. If people choose, that's their choice. If they fall into the addiction, that's their fault. We shouldn't do anything. And then Leo's like, we need to cut the head off of these criminal organizations, throw them all in jail, dismantle them. We, to the point of martyrdom, destroy all of these peddlers of addiction. This is so much better. This is so much better. I love Pope Leo. Pope Leo is just so awesome. Anyways, the fight against drug trafficking, educational commitment among the poor, the defense of indigenous communities and migrants, and fidelity to the social doctrine of the church are in many places considered subversive, including in America. Dear young people, you are not spectators. This is where he speaks directly to us to actually do something about this. Dear young people, you are not spectators of the renewal our earth so badly needs. You are protagonists. God does great things with those he frees from evil. The church needs you. Humanity needs you. Education and politics need you. Together, we will make the infinite dignity impressed on each person prevail over every degrading addiction. End quote. That was just so awesome. That's actually what I meant by the title of this video. What did I title this video again? Leo the 14th rebukes the world. That's what I meant by this title. Well, I could also say Israel and pornographers. Maybe I'll put that in like little parentheses in the title. But I mean, he really is just total war. Pope Leo the 14th is total war on these issues. He's not limp-wristed. He's actually calling us to the point of martyrdom to dismantle all of these absolutely awful criminal organizations, to destroy all of those countries that act as criminal organizations. Well, not destroy the countries, obviously, but you know what I mean. To solve the problems which are leading to them, the merchants of death who are making money off of war. Like these are just so awesome, so awesome. Pope Francis would say stuff like this too, and everybody would ignore it. But yeah, meditate on this for a while. That's just, I just love it so much. Okay, so the 27th, that is the feast day of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So he gave 2 messages that day. He did, both of these messages are actually very concerned with the priesthood, the spirituality of the priesthood, and the way in which the spirituality of the priesthood relates to the Sacred Heart. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, Sacred Heart, spirituality of the priesthood, I would suggest he gave a message on this, and he also gave a sermon on this at the Mass on the 27th. Okay, so 28th, he met with a delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It's a basic ecumenical statement. You're interested in that stuff, read it. Audience with participants in the general chapter of the Congregation of the Order of St. Benedict. Kind of a basic statement about the religious life, if you want to read about it. Audience with pilgrims, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Basically just says the same thing he said to the Eastern Catholic churches before. If you're interested about it, read about it. And then June 29th. So June 29th, that was the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul. He does something very cool here, actually. This is the imposition of the pallia. So if those who don't know, there is a special vestment that is worn by metropolitan archbishops, which are basically indicatory of a unique form of authority delegated by the Pope. So this is worn by the Pope himself, it's worn by metropolitan archbishops, and it's worn by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, a Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. These are unique positions within the church that the Pope himself invests the authority with. Now, traditionally, what would happen is there would be this Mass on the feasts of the Apostles Peter and Paul, and new metropolitan archbishops would receive the pallium from the hands of the Pope. But unfortunately, under Pope Francis, he changed the rules on this, and he said that it actually should be invested in the nuncio of the country. And he said this was more so he justified it by the fact that this is for the locality of the church, more so emphasizing that the metropolitan archbishop is the metropolitan archbishop of that area and, closeness to that area. That was the justification for it. But Leo the 14th, he reversed that. He said, no, what we need to do is in order to emphasize the centrality of Rome, in order to emphasize the centrality of the Bishop of Rome, of the Pope, what we need to do is we need to begin investing. I need to begin investing personally all of these metropolitan archbishops myself. So that's what he did. So the sermons on each of these days, he talks about ecclesiastical communion and unity, talks about Rome as the center of unity and as the exemplar of unity. I've done a lot of commentary on that in my past ones. If you want to read about it, go ahead. He does an Angelus message, which is about Saints Peter and Paul, which is pretty good. So now on the 30th, he gave a audience to the representatives of female religious institutes. He talks about the apostolate of charity. So if you're interested in the apostolate of charity, particularly, he gives a treatment of it. No, it's pretty good. And then also that day, he gives a message to the participants in the 44th session of the Food and Agriculture Organization Conference. He talks about world hunger. He gives actually a very informed and intelligent and systematic treatment of the causes of hunger and the genuine solutions of hunger and some of the false solutions of hunger. It's a pretty interesting. It shows, it at least shows that the church thinks through a lot of these things a lot and doesn't only give vague platitudes about how we solve these different problems. So it's pretty good. But here is where I actually need the Pope's blame. So a lot of people on June 30th, when this message came out, which is to a mostly secular audience, in this message, he talks about how the multiplication of the loaves, he says that the real miracle was the miracle of sharing. And a lot of people are just like, oh no, Pope Leo, he did a modernism. Because to be fair, yes, there are a lot of modernists who denied the veracity of the multiplication of the loaves and basically said those were all fake miracles. And the real miracles there wasn't actually any real miracles because they didn't believe in miracles. But they said basically this was just an instance of somebody sharing their lunch with a lot of people. And that's what they said. So this is what he actually says. He says, the church encourages all initiatives to put an end to the outrage of hunger in the world, making her own the sentiment of her Lord Jesus, who, as the Gospels narrate, when he saw a certain multitude coming to him to hear his word, was concerned first of all to feed them, and for this purpose asked the disciples to take charge of the problem, abundantly blessing the efforts they made. However, and then the first part is like, we need to make the sentiments of Jesus our own. We need to make the sentiment, and this is actually connected with the Sacred Heart devotion. We need to make the very sentiments, the very thoughts of Jesus, the thoughts of our own heart. And that's how our heart is united to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So he says, however, I accidentally went down. I lost my thing. Okay, there you go. However, when we read the account of what is commonly called the multiplication of loaves, we realize that the real miracle performed by Christ was to show that the key in overcoming hunger lies in sharing rather than greedily hoarding. So a lot of people are like, oh no, he said this is what the real miracle does. So therefore he must deny that the miracle of the multiplication of loaves happened. And therefore he is a miracle denying modernist. Well, this is actually not the case. What he was really saying, and I'll show you a different part of it, which clarifies this. But what he really was saying is he was saying the absolutely true thing that miracles are not merely like cool magic tricks, right? Miracles are actually signs. That's part of the very notion of miracle. A miracle is a sign which is above the power of nature. Like that's what a miracle is. Miracle is supposed to point to something. So really what the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves is supposed to point to, yes, there's a Eucharistic meaning, but it's also meant to teach the principles of the just distribution of goods, right? And the charity in which we ought to exercise in the distribution of our own goods. This was what it was meant to show. And actually, it is very truly said that the miracle of an act of charity is greater than the miracle of the multiplication of loaves. Why is this? Well, in the words of the theologians, when it comes to the multiplication of loaves, this is what is called a something which is supernaturale quad modum, supernatural according to mode. So the thing itself is something which is natural, but it's just done in a supernatural manner. So, for example, if you healed somebody quickly, that is something which is natural, but it's done in a supernatural manner. But when it comes to those acts of the theological virtues, when it comes to the virtues themselves, gifts of the Holy Ghost, sanctifying grace, etc., these are not only supernaturale quad modum, but supernaturale quad substantiam. So supernatural according to substance. So they have a much higher, an infinitely higher degree of dignity than the miracle itself. So really what the more important thing is actually in the multiplication of loaves is the effects of supernatural charity, which were brought about in the hearts of the listeners, not the sign which was meant to teach this, which was the miracle itself. So as to the claim that when he says that the true miracle is X, that he meant to deny that the multiplication of loaves was a miracle, he, in an Angelus on the 22nd, which I mentioned earlier, he actually does bring up this miracle itself, and he explains himself. He says, quote, in order to feed the thousands of people who came to listen to him and to ask for healing, Jesus invited the apostles to bring him what little they had. He then blessed the loaves and fishes and told them to distribute them to everyone. The result was astonishing. Not only did everyone receive enough food, but there was an abundance left over. Beyond being a marvel, this miracle is a sign that reminds us that God's gifts, even the smallest, grow whenever they are shared. So he says this is a miracle, but he says the more significant part is that it's a sign of something else, which has to do with the sharing of goods that comes from charity. So he's very orthodox on this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, good theology must always lead you to this conclusion that he drew. So a lot of people are misinterpreting that and calling him a modernist over it, but he clearly calls this a miracle and explains himself. Okay, and then his next statement is on July 2nd, which is yesterday. And he had two messages. He had one message to the members of the Synod of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, same as all the other Bislarper statements. I'm joking about that. Same as the other Bislarper statements. He just, talks about Eastern traditions, Eastern Catholics good, here's how we can deal with some problems, and here's what the Eastern Catholics can do for us. We've already talked about all that stuff. He didn't really add anything new on this. And then he had a message on the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. It's actually kind of like a systematic overview of the environment. So if you're interested in environmental justice and things about that, you can read what he says on the environment. Really just kind of summarizing and implementing some of what Pope Francis says in Laudato Si. So in Laudato Deum. So if you want to read about those, that's on July 2nd, and you can be my guest, but that's not really something that is of a general or a universal focus. Okay, anyways, I'm going to deal with some of those super chats that I see, and then I'm going to get going because we've been going for an hour. Everyone, as a reminder, make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe, make sure you turn your bell notification on, make sure you follow watch the rest of the episodes. I made a playlist. It's linked below. Make sure you watch the rest of the episodes on the playlist because a lot of these connect together, as you can see. I think that's about it. Oh, yeah, justification video tomorrow. You already know about Patreon. If you want to perpetually support me so I can keep doing all this, patreon.com/militant-Thomas. But I'll do with these super chats. Been going through the pain of talking with my parents who left the faith. If anyone can, could you please say a quick prayer for them and others who have left the faith? Of course. Morsaltra McChicken Money, thank you very much. And thank you for the gifted memberships. Here's beer and pizza money. When are the hats coming? I'm new here, looking skinny. If you don't get the reference, don't worry about it. Chewing tobacco money. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Give it to me straight, Wagner. When will Pope Leo crack down on AI? How cooked am I and my memes? Taffy, your memes are awesome. You're awesome. I love you very much. You're my favorite, Taffy. Okay, I love all of your videos and your memes and your edits. They're very funny. They're very awesome. But I don't think he's going to universally. He's not going to universally crack down on AI. We already have the document from the CDF on the AI, which doesn't say anything like you can't use it or anything like that. So it's very unlikely that a pope is just going to completely overturn a CDF document, although it happens. Okay. Anyways, I'm going to get going. I appreciate all you guys very much. Make sure you do all those things that I reminded you of, to like, subscribe, turn the bell notification on. Remember to share anything you find helpful with other people. It really helps me out. Personal word of mouth actually works very well. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and have an awesome weekend. Awesome 4th of July, American Pope. So this is the first Catholic 4th of July that we have. And as always, God bless.